Imagine being 65 years old, broke, unemployed, and with almost nothing left. Most people would call that the end. But Colonel Harland Sanders saw one thing differently. He had a recipe. So he put a pressure cooker in his car, drove from restaurant to restaurant, and started selling an idea that almost nobody wanted. He was rejected again and again. But then, on his 1010th pitch, someone finally said yes. And that single yes helped turn one man's chicken recipe into KFC. This is the unbelievable story of how Colonel Sanders built a global business when most people would have already given up. Harland Sanders wasn't born a successful businessman. Long before the white suit, the goatee, and the famous Kentucky Fried Chicken logo, Sanders spent decades struggling to find his place. He worked different jobs, changed careers, and experienced repeated setbacks. But everything changed when he began serving food at a roadside service station in Corbin, Kentucky. At first, he wasn't trying to build a global restaurant empire. He was simply trying to feed hungry travelers. But customers quickly discovered something special about his chicken. Sanders became obsessed with improving it. He experimented with different cooking techniques until he developed a faster pressure cooking method that helped produce consistent chicken. Then he created the famous blend of 11 herbs and spices. The recipe was becoming valuable. But Sanders still had a problem. His restaurant depended heavily on traffic passing through Corbin. And then the road changed. A new highway diverted travelers away from his restaurant. The customers disappeared. The business Sanders had spent years building began collapsing. In 1956, at around 65 years old, he sold the restaurant at a loss. Think about that. After decades of work, Sanders was back at almost zero. No successful restaurant. No guaranteed income. No massive company. Most people at that age would have retired. Sanders did something completely different. He took his recipe and started driving. Instead of building restaurants himself, he began approaching restaurant owners and offering them a deal. They would provide the restaurant, employees, equipment, and operating costs. Sanders would provide the recipe, cooking method, and brand. It was a simple idea with enormous potential. He didn't need to own every restaurant. He needed other people to want to use his system. In 1952, Pete Harmon became the first KFC franchisee in Salt Lake City. And suddenly, Sanders had discovered something much bigger than selling chicken. He had discovered leverage. But getting one franchise wasn't enough. Sanders needed more. So he got into his car and started visiting restaurant after restaurant. He pitched his chicken. Restaurant owners rejected him. Then another rejected him. And another. And another. According to KFC's historical account, Sanders eventually secured a contract on his 1010th sales pitch. 1009 attempts didn't work. But he only needed one to change everything. That's what makes the story so powerful. Sanders didn't suddenly become successful because everyone finally recognized his genius. He simply kept making the next pitch. And once the first franchisees started succeeding, the model became easier to scale. This was the genius of the franchise system. Sanders didn't have to build every location himself. Instead, independent restaurant owners could operate locations under the KFC brand. They invested their own money. They managed their own restaurants. They hired their own employees. But Sanders' recipe and system could be replicated again and again. One restaurant became several. Several became dozens. Dozens became hundreds. According to Harvard Business School, the franchise system grew from just 5 stores in 1958 to more than 600 by 1963. And Sanders understood something else. The chicken was important. But the brand could be even more powerful. So he turned himself into a character. The white suit. The black string tie. The goatee. The cane. The calm Kentucky accent. Colonel Sanders wasn't just the founder anymore. He was the brand. Customers could recognize him instantly. The founder became the advertisement. The advertisement became the identity of the company. And the identity helped KFC stand out as it expanded. By 1964, Sanders Chicken was being sold through more than 600 franchises. And then came one of the biggest decisions of his life. Sanders sold his interest in the company for about $2 million. The man who had once been nearly broke at 65 had transformed his recipe into a national franchise empire. But the real lesson isn't the $2 million. It's what happened before it. Sanders failed repeatedly. He lost businesses. He changed careers. He watched his restaurant collapse. He was rejected hundreds of times. And when he finally found the opportunity, he wasn't 25. He wasn't 30. He wasn't even 40. He was around 65. That's what makes Colonel Sanders' story different from the typical millionaire success story. We often hear that you need to start young. That you need to build your company in your 20s. That if you haven't made it by a certain age, you've missed your opportunity. Sanders proved otherwise. His biggest business opportunity appeared after one of his biggest failures. And the secret wasn't that he had unlimited money. He didn't. It wasn't that everyone believed in him. They didn't. It wasn't even that he had a revolutionary product. It was chicken. His advantage was something much simpler. He had a valuable system. And he refused to stop selling it. That is the real business lesson behind KFC. Sanders didn't scale by working harder in one restaurant. He scaled by creating a system other people could use. He transformed the product into a process. The process into a franchise. The franchise into a brand. And the brand into an empire. So if you're building a business today, remember the Colonel. Your biggest asset might not be your money. It might be your knowledge. Your process. Your product. Your brand. Or simply an idea that hasn't found the right market yet. Colonel Sanders didn't build KFC when everything was going right. He built it after his original business had collapsed. He didn't succeed because he never failed. He succeeded because failure never convinced him to stop. At 65, most people saw the end of his career. Sanders saw another beginning. And sometimes, that's all success really requires. One more attempt. One more pitch. One more yes. Because Colonel Sanders didn't build KFC when he had everything. He built it when he had almost nothing left. And that's why his story isn't really about fried chicken. It's about what can happen when you refuse to quit one failure before success.